Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This program, coming right before Passover, is a very interesting one. Because on Passover, Jews have a tendency to reflect on those who threaten the Jewish people. And for the last 28 years, the United States government more or less gave a green light to the PLO to say what it wanted, do what it wanted, without any real interference from the United States government. The question is, after 28 years, will the Trump administration allow the PLO to trample on Trump? Now, with the new U.S. administration, the time has come to examine how the United States allowed the PLO to trample upon U.S. government policies over a period of 28 years. And to transform, and the concept I'd like to present is how the 10 discretions of U.S. policy towards the PLO should be made into an American policy issue and not an Israeli obsession. Okay? It's very important to understand that Israel has been dumped upon very, very often, not only by the United States, but by nations around the world. And often the PLO indiscretions aren't discussed at all. Now, I want to go through 10 policies that the United States imposed over the past 28 years, which need to be examined, need to be questioned. The first, we go back to December 1988, during the last month of the Reagan administration. The United States recognized the PLO in December 1988, on condition that the PLO recognize UN Resolution 242, which required the PLO to embrace the right of every nation to secure boundaries, especially Israel. However, the PLO ignored these requirements for U.S. recognition of the PLO, and still the U.S. recognized the PLO. It was a very strange circumstance, asking Yasser Arafat, then the head of the PLO, to denounce terrorism, and as he walked through the corridors of the UN in Geneva, people said, "What are you doing?" "I'm denouncing tourism." No, terrorism, to get it right, terrorism. Anyway, when he got to the dais, he did denounce terrorism. And he mumbled something about 242, which wasn't clear. Yasser Abdrabbo, his spokesman at the time, was asked to clarify. He said, we recognize the UN resolutions, great, but that doesn't mean that we cannot continue our struggle for national liberation of Palestine. And saying very specifically that the military activities of the PLO to liberate Palestine would not be considered by the PLO to be terrorism. Even though this was the case, the United States government went and recognized the PLO. And I asked Alan Keyes, a close advisor to Ronald Reagan, a year later when he visited Israel, why was it that President Reagan recognized the PLO, despite the fact that the PLO did not follow U.S. government policies of recognizing 242, recognizing the right of every nation to exist and to continue and to grow and to prosper. The answer that Alan Keyes gave me was that the Saudi Arabian government had met with the Reagan administration and basically threatened them. The Saudis were afraid of a PLO invasion of the Saudi Peninsula. They were afraid of a PLO intifada. And what they did was to say, if you don't recognize the PLO, we'll start pulling Saudi investments out of the United States. A very clear threat. And Reagan administration crumbled. And from then until today, the PLO has been recognized by the American government. Now, the ultimate moment of formal recognition of the PLO, beyond simply the gesture to Yasser Arafat in 1988, was the PLO-Israel-Oslo Accord, which was concluded on the White House lawn on September 13th, 1993. This is the second issue. The first, again, was what happened with Reagan, the Reagan administration recognition of the PLO, and this is the second one. The PLO-Israel-Oslo Accord, witnessed and guaranteed by the United States government. What was that all about? That was about a very simple formula. The two sides would sign. It was witnessed by the United States and Russia, and it would require one thing, that the PLO get its accord agreed to by the PLO executive, that the Israeli side would get the Knesset to approve. Well, the Knesset approved it by a vote of 61 to 50, and on the night of October 6th, 1993, there was supposed to be the PLO Executive Committee meeting to endorse, to ratify what they call the Declaration of Principles of the Oslo Accord. One Israeli correspondent was present, whose name was Pinchas Inbari, still is Pinchas Inbari, from the newspaper known as Al Mishmar, left-wing associated newspaper, and he went into the corridor, asked Arafat, "Where's the meeting?" He says, "We're not going to have a meeting. I can't get a quorum." Therefore, the Oslo Accord, known as the DOP, was never ratified. However, the United States government related to it as if it was ratified. Very important to understand. It was never ratified. Therefore, what's called the Oslo process lasted from August 20th, 1993, when there was an initialing of the DOP in Oslo, and then the signature of the leaders of both sides on the White House lawn, September 13th, 1993, and on October 6th, 1993, there was no ratification of the accord. However, the United States position was that they were going to accept Arafat's signature on the White House lawn at the time as being enough. And any challenge to that was not accepted. Those of us in the world of journalism who put letters to the American embassy about this issue were just ignored. No answer. Again, in Israel today, there is a word called ki'ilu, as if. They're acting as if it exists. It doesn't exist. So that's the second issue. The third issue is the U.S. made a gesture to allow the PLO to open an embassy in Washington, D.C. in 1995. However, the United States Congress passed a law that until the PLO met the requirement of U.S. law to cancel the PLO covenant to destroy Israel, they would not be allowed to open a PLO embassy in Washington. So on April 24th, 1996, the PLO made a gathering of the PNC, the Palestine National Council, our agency. At the time, we had the Israel Resource News Agency. We still do. We hired a crew to go there, and the crews weren't working that day because it was Israel Independence Day. So we had the one crew there. And what we witnessed was a sleight of hand situation by Arafat. The day before, his American advisors had given the American press a statement that everything would be okay. They would cancel the PLO covenant. That would be the purpose of the PNC meeting. However, at that session, there was a cancellation, not of the covenant, but of the intent to cancel the covenant. There was a new memo that was put out by Arafat. We have this on video very clearly, saying that we can only muster the support to create a committee to consider the cancellation of the covenant to destroy Israel. As a result, what happened? It was ignored by the United States government. The United States government, instead of understanding that the PLO had not canceled its accord, instead what did it do? It ignored it and made it look like as if it happened. Now, our agency sent a video, at that time we were dealing with VHS videos, to Martin Indyk, who was then the U.S. ambassador to Israel, and it was a very clear message we sent with it, with the memo, together with a man named Professor Yoshua Porat, a very distinguished left-wing associated professor of Middle Eastern Studies, one of the academic experts on the Palestinian Arab history, who went through the protocols of the meeting that took place and showed that there had been no cancellation of the covenant. However, that was ignored by the United States government, and the PLO anyway was allowed to open its embassy. No one in Israel wanted to challenge the American government decision. Very important to understand what happened here. The American government made a very clear law, etched in stone, that no PLO embassy would be allowed. No member of the PLO would be allowed to step foot in the United States outside of course, the United Nations, and until and unless the covenant was canceled. But they did so anyway. Number 4, the United States made a decision to allow Hamas to function in U.S.-funded schools. Now, this is a very strange situation because there's a legislation on the books of the U.S. Congress passed in 2003, which is by the reinforced in 2003, but it had been on the books before, that any FTO, any foreign terrorist organization, such as Hamas, would not be allowed to function in the schools. However, they allowed it to happen. Condoleezza Rice, later who became Secretary of State, said very clearly that even if they're on the payroll of U.S. government-funded agencies, they would be allowed to function. And Condoleezza Rice asked that the PA, which was Palestinian Authority, which was having elections, would be able to absorb the Hamas despite their FTO, foreign terrorist organization status. Now, the next issue which we're dealing with is the PLO, the U.S.-funded UNRWA curriculum, instituted a war education system, which violated the UN Charter, of which the United States is a Security Council member, ignoring that completely. Then this is a situation where UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, basically, how shall we say, nurtured the United States as its main supporter, while at the same time allowing Hamas to be a prime focus of UNRWA education. Very strange situation. An agency recognized as a terrorist organization, handling schools, being involved with the political situation. Number 6, the United States helped create the PSF, the Palestinian Security Forces, officially having an armed force. And when our agency, with the funding of the Middle East Forum, run by Dr. Daniel Pipes, we did a thorough study of the PSF, the Palestine Security Forces, and which we noticed that the PSF included FTOs, foreign terrorist organizations, which were declared to be illegal and terrorist by the United States government. We submitted our report to the U.S. House, U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee, to the U.S. Embassy, to other factors in the U.S. Congress, and it was ignored completely. And very important to understand. We had both Arabs and Jews prepare this report, high-level, serious professionals, to show that what was supposed to be a force for peace was turning out to be a force for promoting terror. And Israel has yet to see the ultimate results of the PSF, including absorbing, co-opting terrorist organizations, but that is the situation today. Number 7, the United States passed a law which came to be known as the Coby Mandela Act, named for a little boy who was murdered in 2001 when he was out for a little hike with his friend. And the Coby Mandela Act requires the United States to pursue and prosecute those who harm U.S. citizens in Israel. Now, that law is on the books very clearly. However, the United States government made a decision. We don't know, they didn't announce we're not going to enforce it, but all attempts to get the United States to pursue terrorists. Now, why is this important, the pursuit of terrorists? Because what the Oslo Accord wound up doing was to allow certain areas that Israel could not pursue terrorists into those areas. Now, the FBI, which has a presence here in Israel, could easily take upon itself that role of pursuit of terrorists, of hot pursuit of terrorists. Most recently, a young man was stabbed in the back near one of the lines that goes into the Palestinian Authority, an American citizen, stabbed 4 times in the back, and the stabber just went a few minutes over the line into the Palestinian Authority. Now the question is, and he's complained to the U.S. government about it without any real response. Well, where is the legislation on the books that requires the U.S. to help with hot pursuit? There's also leads us to another issue, which is that the U.S. established an office to monitor anti-Semitism. And this is part of the whole modern era with the also post-Oslo Accords, but it's also part of the peace process. The U.S. would monitor anti-Semitism. However, request of the United States office to monitor anti-Semitism was met with response was, well, with no response, why aren't you covering Palestinian Authority anti-Semitism? Number 9, a concomitant to that, we met with the Pope's ambassador, his late ambassador, Archbishop Sambi, who showed us the U.S.-funded Palestinian Authority Constitution, which was based on, of all things, the Sharia law. The Sharia law, not just the Sharia law that Archbishop Sambi had experienced in Bangladesh and in Indonesia. That Sharia law recognized minorities, non-Muslims, the human rights, civil liberties of other religions. This Sharia law, proposed for the Palestinian Authority, prepared by the United States government, gave no juridical status to anyone outside of Muslims who would be part of the PA. Very important, establishing an Islamic state with no rights for anyone but Muslims. And this was funded by the United States government. How do we know? Because it said so right on their masthead. And last but not least, number 10, the United States created a Palestinian Authority electoral process. And whom did the United States appoint to run that electoral process? None other than former President Jimmy Carter. Now, Jimmy Carter, when our agency covered, there have been 3 elections, 2 presidential elections, 1 legislative election of the Palestinian Authority. And in 1994, when in 1994 was it? When the election took place, no, it was 95, excuse me, 96, excuse me, January 1996, when the elections took place for the head of the Palestinian Authority, the president of the Palestinian Authority, Arafat was running against Dr. Shafi. Dr. Shafi had represented the PLO at the Madrid talks, the talks that took place in Madrid. And 2 days before the election, actually a week before the election, his house was blown up to encourage him to back out of the race, which he did. When I asked Jimmy Carter about it, he said, well, we have problems like that in Chicago too. That was his response. I said, how can you call this a fair election? And the issue of the elections being less than fair is something that is endemic to the situation. And the question is, under a new president, will the system continue to relegate the supervision of PA elections to Jimmy Carter? So in sum, the issue of the school books and the education system, the issue of the non-ratification of the DOP, the non-cancellation of the covenant, the issue of the Hamas being an integral part of the education system and of the running of the PA, the issue of the PSF, the Palestine Security Forces, absorbing terrorist groups. All these are issues that we're wondering what will be the position of the U.S. government in the near future. What we're wondering is, which is it going to be? Will the current president, follow 28 years of just non-response or not? We had an indication of his policy in early February when President Trump conducted a press conference in the presence of the Israeli Prime Minister, and he said, I've seen those school books. This education is wrong. And we understand from different sources that President Trump has given the green light to the Israeli government to close down and to condition funds to the Palestinian Authority education system on a basic change. So we are witnessing some change, and we'll see what happens. All I can say is, as we're watching the situation develop, we most recently saw that UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency, spread a rumor or a piece of information that they are reforming their schools. When we asked them, and changing their school curriculum to promote peace and tolerance and acceptance of Israel. However, when we met with the people from the Palestinian Ministry of Education, which gives the books and the content of education to the PA, to UNRWA, we discovered that there was no change. But what was changed was the impression they left with the president, and with the U.S. Congress, with other factors. So there you have it. The question we have is, will the Trump administration allow the PLO to trample on Trump? Time will tell. But nothing can happen until we recognize the policies that the United States has allowed the PLO to conduct over the last 28 years with virtual no American interference to stop it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming this evening.